The Boys, Amazon's hit TV show based on Gareth Ennis's cult comic book series that I had never heard of before this. So, I'm going to discuss kind of the difference between the show and the comics first in a pretty broad sense. So, I'm not going to have any spoilers from the comics that the show hasn't essentially already done. So, if you're caught up on the show, then you're good to go on it. And I'll give a warning before I get into any like in-depth spoilers that are essentially plot lines that the show could lift from the comics that they haven't yet. Like I said, first broad stuff, just general things, then much more narrow. So, why talk about The Boys?
I'm the world's greatest superhero. I can do whatever the fuck I want.
Well, I explained it to a friend of mine. It's been a while since I was really into a TV show or a streaming show, whatever you want to call them. Yeah, just there haven't been a lot of great, what they used to call water cooler shows. Now I think they should probably be called internet forum shows. Shows that people care about, shows that people discuss, shows that people really want to think about, and this and that. Like most of those shows are gone, or they should be gone. Like with The Walking Dead, for the love of God, just end that show. Don't do 3 more spinoffs. Completely destroy the legacy of that. Game of Thrones ended. Sons of Anarchy's long gone. Breaking Bad's long gone. Just a lot of those shows that people were really into, really like to talk about and analyze, just not there. And The Boys is one of the few ones that has come up along with The Mandalorian that people are really interested in, that people really talk about. I mean, even Downton Abbey's long off the air. They just did a movie, but yeah. So the Boys is a really great show. I like it a lot, and despite the fact that the show's creator Eric Kripke seems to be actively trying to convince people not to watch it by being a complete dick in interviews, it's a really entertaining show. It's a really great satire. It does a good job of balancing mocking people on the left and people on the right. It does a good job of being funny but taking itself seriously enough that you can get lost in the characters. It does a good job with almost everything. Some people have pointed out that the action's not quite on point. The Nazi subplot was a bit unwelcome, but in fairness, he said that was actually written back in 2018 before we heard the word Nazi every day, all day in 2020. It's just I think we probably hear the word Nazi more today in modern day America than Americans heard it in the 1940s when there actually was a Third Reich. But whatever. So Gareth Ennis clearly didn't care for superheroes. Now he worked on The Punisher. He was the dude who did Preacher, if you remember the AMC show. I didn't actually care for that show, but it did have a strong but apparently small fan base because I only think it lasted 3 seasons. But Gareth Ennis did The Boys, and he said he wanted to out Preacher. Now, Preacher was a notoriously edgy, dark, violent, profane thing. And reading The Boys, which ran through the 2000s, mid to late 2000s, 72 issues, I think. It was pretty freaking edgy. Like it was legit. It could only have happened in the 2000s. Like the edgelord 2000s, when anything went. When you had movies like Hostel 2 opening nationwide. That couldn't happen today. People would lose their damn minds. Sons of Anarchy couldn't happen today. Not in the way it was. Not in that format. Not in that ultra un-PC kind of approach. Yeah, you just couldn't do that kind of thing. So The Boys, the comic, it's clearly written from the perspective of someone who is at least annoyed by superhero comics, if not absolutely hates them. And again, he did work on The Punisher, but The Punisher's not actually a superhero, so yeah. So, reading The Boys the comic and watching The Boys the show, if they didn't have the same character names and not even really designs, just really the characters' names, like if they had changed the names for the show, you could easily watch the show and read the comic and not realize that they were the same thing. It's that different. They are night and day in some ways. So the comic has a very humorous tone, and there's not a lot of action in the comic, so that's first and foremost. There are serious moments in the comic for sure, but generally speaking, it's a very, very dark comedy. Like The Boys TV show is more in the vein of traditional cable TV shows. And again, I know it's streaming, but it's in that vein of cable TV shows that popped up in the mid 2000s, like Dexter, where it would be very dark, but there would still be a joke about every 5 to 10 minutes just to kind of lighten the mood. But there's a term when adapting, literature to film, and it's called or TV, whatever. It's called Holding It Up to Scraps. And holding it up to scraps means you basically just take little bits and pieces and do your own thing. And so far, that's what The Boys has done. It's taken little bits and pieces here and there, but generally, it is completely its own animal. So, where do you start? Let's start with The Boys. Now, first off, The Boys, the comic book, is about the boys. It's not about the boys and the Seven. Like, the show could just as easily be called The Seven. I mean, it literally could. Think about it, minute for minute. Who's in this show the most? Huey or Billy Butcher? Or Homelander and Starlight? Like, Homelander and Starlight are in the show every bit as much as Billy Butcher and Huey. So you could just as easily have called this show The Seven. The comic, not the case. In fact, the Seven is very minor in the first 15 to 20 issues. They get mentioned they drop in and out. And also, Homelander is nowhere near as important in the comics. Like even once the Seven become more important, it's still very much the story of Huey Campbell and Billy Butcher. And I'm not even positive his last name was Campbell in the comics, because the character in the comics was Scottish. He's actually very closely modeled after Simon Pegg on purpose. Now, keep in mind, this was around the time when Simon Pegg was huge. People loved Simon Pegg because of Shaun of the Dead. So Huey, and in the comics, his nickname is Wee Huey, like wee, like small, like Wee Huey, because he's shorter than any of the other boys except for Yuki, who's really only referred to as the female in the comics. They may have Yuki, Kimiko. Who's Yuki? I don't even know why I said that. Kimiko. I don't remember if they ever even say her real name. Like, Mother's Milk is just Mother's Milk. Frenchie is just Frenchie. They pretty much only go by their nicknames, with the exception of Butcher and Huey. And again, Huey's Wee Huey. And Huey looks exactly like Simon Pegg, to the point where it kind of takes a little while to get used to, especially considering how far Simon Pegg's career has fallen. Now, that also explains why the hell is Simon Pegg in the show. Now, Huey's dad is not in the comics. If he is, it's like a second, because I forgot it. Because I don't remember seeing Huey's dad at all. He did not live with his dad. He was a grown man. He seemed a bit older, also. Huey came across a bit older and a lot more worldly. He doesn't seem like this sort of hung out in his bedroom on prom night type that he is on the show. Like, Huey on the show definitely feels like the guy who didn't get a date. Like the guy who sat at home and played video games and talked on forums. In the comics, he's uncomfortable with the violence of the world he finds himself in after what happens to his girlfriend, but it's not anywhere near as extreme. Like, he still seems like a regular guy you'd meet at a bar. Huey on the show seems like a guy you might bump into at GameStop because his internet went down and he just broke down and bought the physical copy of the game instead of downloading it, which he normally would do. Like, he just seems like that guy, and so he's very different. Butcher is actually similar-ish, because as the comic goes on, he gets a lot worse. But he is definitely more of a square-jawed anti-hero in the comics. He's much more put together, and he's much more of a team leader. In the show, he kind of is pulling them together, and it's a much more cohesive unit. They're more of a team in the comics. And they're government sanctioned. Now, in the end of the second season, they got, like, unofficial sanction. But in the comics, they're straight up. They work for the CIA. Mallory, who is younger, it's hard to tell how old she is in the comics. It seems like she's probably in her 40s in the comics. And in the show, she's, 60? And she and Butcher are having a sexual relationship in the comics. So that's different. And it's like a really unhealthy, dirty, sexual relationship. Like, he'll be pulling her hair and she'll be telling him she hates him and he disgusts her, like that kind. So Mallory's different. And it wasn't Mallory's grandkids that died. It was actually a different guy that's not in the team at all anymore. He is fully out. His grandkids were the ones that Lamplighter burned. So, as far as personality, Butcher, yeah, he's more put together, but he's still ruthless. He's actually maybe more ruthless in the comics. Maybe. Frenchie's more of a stereotypical French guy. Like, he likes to speak in romantic soliloquy. Like, he's legitimately a parody of a French person in the comics. He's not his own kind of like weird skeevy hacker that he is on the show. He's more just a parody of a French guy. Like, Huey, my friend, we will go out on the town and find love in the strangers. Like, I mean, I'm not joking. He talks like that. Kimiko is, I don't know that she talks at all in the comics. If she did, it was very, very brief. She's almost completely silent. I know she's silent on the show, but she also has the sign language on the show. I don't remember her signing in the comics either. Mother's Milk is actually really similar. Mother's Milk is basically the same character. MM. He is they changed the least on him. He's still a very tall black man with a little bit of OCD, and he is also kind of the soul of the group. Butcher kind of refers to him as that. The comics also mention right out the gate that Butcher brings Huey in because Butcher wanted a little brother. Now, I don't remember mentioning Butcher's brother dying, but again, I kind of binged these comics. I read 30 of them in less than a month, so I may have missed some details, so it's possible I just missed that. But yeah, Butcher and the boys are the main focal point of the comic. They are the heroes, and the Seven they'll show up and they come back and forth. But the Seven are also pretty different. Now, first off, they race swapped A-Train and the Deep. So A-Train is white in the comics, and he's a young man. He's actually just started the crew, whereas on the show, of course, he's about to age out of the crew. And the Deep is black. Now, I actually wasn't even sure if the Deep was black because the way they drew him, he's always his design is dramatically different. In the comics, he is in a full old school diving outfit, like the wetsuit, the helmet, everything. So you don't actually see a lot of his skin, but I was like, I think he's black, and finally they do mention him because at one point a character calls him, "You're the least black man in America," kind of essentially calling him an Uncle Tom. But yeah, so the Deep and A-Train's are race swapped. A-Train's personality, except that he's more immature, is actually pretty similar. He's still kind of a selfish, self-involved dick. The Deep is very different, though. The Deep is more of a stalwart, I'm gonna mess you up type. Like, he's not this bumbling himbo. You know, if you remember the old Seinfeld episode, a himbo, a male bimbo, just an airhead, a pretty boy airhead. Like he's on the show. He's not at all like that on the comics. He's actually more of a badass in the comics. Queen Maeve is depicted differently. She's way bitchier. She's way bitchier. But she's also an alcoholic actively, as opposed to in the show she's in like AA or whatever. She's also not gay in the comics. Or if she was, I didn't catch it. She was definitely involved with, she is bisexual in the show, but she's not in a current relationship with a woman. She prefers one-night stands with men in the comics. And her character felt to me like she was a little bit of a parody of a Kim Kardashian, Paris Hilton type. In the 2000s, they used to call them celebutantes, meaning basically a rich girl who got famous for showing her ass in public and being, just a drunk party girl. That was kind of a big thing in the 2000s, so it feels to me like she's kind of a parody of that. Who else is there? So Lamplighter. Starlight comes across younger. Huey seems older. Huey seems like he might be about 32-ish, but Starlight seems like she's like literally 18. And in the show, while I'm not sure they've ever specifically said her age, she seems like she's about her age of the actress, which would put her like, mid-late 20s. In the comics, she is straight out of a youth superhero team called the Young Americans, and she vibes very young. She vibes very, very young and naive. And in the show, she's really not. She's naive-ish, but it's really more of a loss of innocence thing than a naive thing. So Starlight's different. Black Noir is very different. His design is very different. So there's actually some dispute on Black Noir in the comics because, the Seven are obviously the evil Justice League. Homelander is evil Superman. Queen Maeve is drunken, pathetic Wonder Woman. The Deep is evil Aquaman. A-Train is evil The Flash. But then Starlight, she's kind of an amalgamation of a few characters, and Gareth Ennis has talked about that, so she's not a direct parody of anyone, and no one really thinks she is. Then, but Black Noir, a lot of people just assume he's a parody of Batman, and that was what I assumed. Because he's got the full black outfit. He's very brooding. He's very mysterious. That's Batman. But no, actually, he's not. He's not intended as a one-to-one parody of anyone. He's his own. Gareth Ennis just created this guy. He's got a little bit of Deadpool in him. Apparently, that was one of the inspirations. Kind of like almost the exact opposite of Deadpool. He has in the comics he's drawn as having a very wiry frame. He's not built like in the show where he's jacked. In the comics, he's got a very wiry kind of Deadpool Spider-Man build to him. So anyway, the Seven is different, and you may notice that I didn't mention Translucent. Well, that's because Translucent wasn't in the Seven. The Invisible Man from season 1, he wasn't in the Seven. If there was a character named Translucent in the comic, I missed it, and it was a very minor character. It would have had to be, because I would have at least caught that much, unless he's in the second half, but still, that's completely different from the show. Yet the other guy in the Seven is actually Jack from Jupiter. You may be wondering, who the hell is Jack from Jupiter? Well, there was an Easter egg for Jack from Jupiter in the second season when Lamplighter gets Huey to watch gay porn with him. There's a guy who looks like Jack from Jupiter in that part where the guy wants all the guys to have sex with him at once, like the all male gangbang. That was a parody of Jack from Jupiter, a tall, very thin, dark skinned man with a kind of funny shaped bald head and a cape. So, yeah, the seven are very different. And and Homelander. Obviously, I got to talk about Homelander. I mean, Homelander's kind of the show. Like the merch, people talk about Homelander more than anyone else. So Homelander in the comics again he's a supporting character in the comics, and he's more of a douchebag. Like Homelander of the show, and what I love about him is Homelander of the show is basically Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, the old Christian Bale cult film. He's basically Patrick, or the book, which is great. He's Patrick Bateman if Patrick Bateman had superpowers. Like he's a preening, self-obsessed narcissist, and the only thing keeping him from going hog wild all the time is that he wants to be loved. He wants to be, he wants to fit in. Like in American Psycho, I want to fit in. Like Homelander, he wants to be the world's greatest superhero, not the world's greatest supervillain, because he wants the crowd to cheer his name. He wants to be the Homelander. He wants to be beloved. So that's different. Homelander of the comics is just a douchebag who likes money. That's really all it is. Like Homelander of the show, I don't see any sign that he cares at all about money. Does he even have a home in the show? Like he just seems to hang out in that one little office in the tower. So yeah, what does this guy need money for? He doesn't care. But yeah, in the comics, he's just a money obsessed prick. And leading into that, so some more specific plot details that got changed. Okay, so right off the bat, Starlight, the bit where she gets sexually harassed by the Deep, in the comics, she was actually sexually harassed by damn near everyone in the group but the Deep. It was Homelander, Black Noir, and A-Train all wanted oral from her, and she did it. So that's very different. And then Maeve shows her no sympathy afterward, which is also different from the show. In the show, Maeve is more jaded, but again, in the comics, Maeve is just kind of a bitch. But they explain that too. So Maeve in the comics, the bit on the airplane with Homelander and Maeve on the airplane, in the show, it's an airplane that's going down. You know what it is if you saw the show. In the comics, though, that's on 9/11. Yeah, this comic book did a parody of 9/11 where Homelander and his the Seven. So there's a running thing in the show that Homelander and the Seven are actually really bad at being superheroes. They almost never do any good, and what little good they do try and do, they usually screw up. And on 9/11, they screwed up. They like crash into the airplane. A couple of them are seriously injured. A couple other of them are just like, nope, I'm out. Homelander and Maeve are the only ones that actually make it onto the plane. And by the time they get there, they realize that the only person they know that's a pilot is Black Noir. He fell the hell off the airplane. So Homelander, like on the show, in its airplane scenario, just says, nope, can't do anything, and I'm not going to save just one of them because then that one will tell everyone that I didn't save the rest. So Homelander just leaves, but Maeve is more conflicted about it. But ultimately, when she realizes she's going down with the plane, she decides to get out, and she gets out, and in the process of getting out, she actually physically kills a couple people who are panicking, drowning man will drag you down with him. So that's why she becomes an alcoholic, actually, is because she feels so guilty for what she did there. So that's pretty damn different. There's other big differences. So another Easter egg. The second season took more from the comic than the first season. The first season took very little from the comic, actually. So like Butcher's dog, Terror, that you see in one episode in the second season, is his constant companion in the comics. He loves his dog. It's always with him. And Kimiko has a very close relationship with the dog as well. So that's bigger. There's a character called Love Sausage. Remember in the show, that one episode where MM sees that one big guy with the beard, sees he has a giant dick, and he goes something like, motherfucker's got a love sausage. Like that's a direct reference to a character from the comics who was actually a fairly prominent supporting character. And Love Sausage is actually an ally, not some weird science experiment with a minor role. Love Sausage is actually an ally. He's a good friend of Butcher's, and he ends up bonding with Huey as well. And he's a retired superhero. So that's a major difference. I mean, Love Sausage looked like he died in the show. I mean, it didn't show it, but it sure as hell looked like he was dead. And he also didn't fight with his dick. That was actually a woman who had extending nipples. I skimmed the second half of the comics. I wasn't really enjoying the comics that much, so I pretty much just burned through the second half, just kind of like skimming, basically looking at the pictures. I didn't read it after that. But my goal with the comics was basically to finish the Stormfront arc, because I had a strong feeling the season was going to finish Stormfront's arc. I didn't see Stormfront coming back for another season. She may, but I didn't. If she does, it'll be in probably a very different way. I'll talk about that a little bit. That's a fan theory. But yeah, so Stormfront is never a member of the Seven and has no particular relationship with Homelander and is a guy. Now, everyone knows Stormfront is a guy because there was this big uproar on the internet that they had, oh no, they gender swapped. And I was like, I don't know anything about this. At the time, I didn't know anything about the comics, so I didn't really care. But they did gender swap him, and to get the story they wanted with this kind of manipulation of Homelander, what they did worked, and it also kind of humanized Homelander a little bit. So, but yeah, Stormfront was leader of a secondary group. And it was kind of the difference between the Seven were like the wholesome superhero group. They both worked for Vought. But the Seven was Vought's wholesome superhero group, and Stormfront was in their not wholesome superhero group. Like Stormfront was in the like the edgy, dark superhero group. And Stormfront is a guy who has one eye, so we got that in the show where she gets stabbed in the eye, which was actually a big plot hole because she's bulletproof, but apparently not pocket knife proof. I missed something on the show when they said that knife was special, but I didn't hear anything. I guess in her entire life she never got any eye injuries. That was, I don't know. I may have missed something. Maybe they said something about that knife being special and I missed it. I don't know. But so Stormfront was the leader of his own crew, and he is a Nazi. He is old, and he is an enemy of the boys. But here's another big thing. So in the show, basically, Stormfront is treated as or not aging, and this is this big, unique thing. And Stormfront was built by the Nazis, and he's the only superhero ever built by the Nazis, the only one they successfully did. You know, they made him with Compound V. So Stormfront is treated as a unique on the show because he's so old but hasn't aged. Now in the comics, all the Seven are old. They were all built in the 40s, so all of them are in their 70s at this point. They were all built with Compound V. They were all genetically engineered. Homelander's backstory is essentially all of their backstories. They were all built in a laboratory, then they had a fake history built up for them. So, yeah, that's a big difference. And another huge difference. The boys are all superheroes. No, for real. In the comics, the boys are superheroes. They've all taken Compound V. Huey doesn't consent to it. Butcher just stabs him in the neck with a needle and tells him what it is. But they're all jacked up, and they flat out say that we are in the roughly the 80th percentile for superheroes. They say that we're stronger than 4 out of 5 superheroes. We're getting like the best Compound V that's available to us. So they're all straight up like badass superheroes. They all have super strength and they're basically invulnerable. You know, on the show, of course, it's really only Kimiko who has superhuman powers. Now, will they do this later in the show? Who knows? But I guess I'm edging into and Stormfront's death was pretty simple. The bit where Maeve, Starlight, and Kimiko are all stomping Stormfront is actually really close to the way Stormfront dies in the comics, where the boys, Maeve isn't involved, but the boys all just stomp the hell out of Stormfront in kind of a way of refighting World War II, because Stormfront's, you know, obviously a Nazi, and he's fighting Butcher being from the UK and kicking his ass, like the UK was getting their ass kicked in World War II, and then and Huey's losing too, but then they call in the American, MM, and they call in the Russian, Love Sausage, and they collectively they essentially stomp Stormfront to death. And Stormfront does seem to be definitively dead. So, and Maeve also. So Maeve is kind of at the end of the second season a loose ally to the boys, and especially to Starlight. But in the comics, Maeve is actually their mole. Not Starlight. Starlight and Huey don't know each other's secret identities throughout most of their relationship, and neither of them is ever using the other. So that's pretty dramatically different as well. That Maeve is the spy. Maeve turned on the Seven essentially when, you know, the 9/11 thing. And of course, there's Black Noir. Now, this is the big one that everyone was talking about, where in the okay. So from here, I'm going to get into kind of spoilery territories, things that they might do on the show, but they did in the comics. But Black Noir, it's hard to explain him without giving away what could potentially be a big plot point later in the show. So spoilers from here on out. I'm going to start getting into things that they may do on the show. But Black Noir, 3, 2, 1, is Homelander's clone. And what a lot of people think is going to end up happening, because what they could easily do is that Black Noir died after his fight with Maeve. And Black Noir is replaced with a clone or something of Homelander. Now, they could easily do that on this show. And I think that it's actually probable that they will, because they kind of set that up. But, that's, something that might happen. What else? Oh, that scene where Maeve has to protect Starlight from Black Noir is in the comics, but it plays out way differently. Because Black Noir, apparently, their revenue needs to go up. And they want to put Starlight in an even skimpier costume, which is literally just a G-string. It's a straight up G-string. So, and Maeve steps, and it looks like Black Noir is going to force her into it, and Maeve steps in and stops him, but there's no fight. So that was kind of the closest I've seen to that happening, and again, there was no fight. So, other differences, the comics, the way they end is that Black Noir turns on Homelander. Again, heavy spoilers for the comics from here on out. But Black Noir turns on Homelander and kills him. And then Butcher has to step in and kill Black Noir. But then Butcher kind of goes nuts and starts killing anyone with Compound V in their system. Ultimately leading to heavy spoilers, Huey killing Butcher. And it kind of implies that Butcher realized he was going mad with power and that he wanted Huey to kill him. Because he lies, he tells Huey that he killed Huey's parents. Huey's mom is alive in the comics. And he tells Huey that he killed Huey's parents, so Huey kills him. And he kind of compliments on him, like, something along the lines of good shot there or something. So that's pretty much how the comics played out. And the comics, all superheroes are evil. Just literally all of them. They flat out say at one point that Starlight is one of the only they say she's the only superhero that's not in on the con, so to speak, because all the superheroes are bad guys, and that's Butcher's whole thesis. He thinks that all the supes are essentially villains, so he thinks that you should be able to kill essentially anyone with Compound V in their systems, ignoring the fact that he and his crew have Compound V in their systems. So yeah, the comics I didn't particularly enjoy. They're very 2000s. They're very edgelord. There's a lot of dick jokes. There's a lot of puke jokes. There's a lot of shit jokes. It didn't make me laugh very often. I didn't particularly enjoy it. It just wasn't for me. It wasn't to my taste. I love the show. I don't know where the show's going from here, because I don't really remember this what is she, a senator? Like an equivalent of her being in the comics, or at least of the issues that I read. But maybe she is, and I just didn't get that far. Yeah, I'm excited to see season 3, and if you want to check out the boys' comics, you can. It's kind of interesting, but I don't suggest reading them while you're watching the show. It makes it a little hard to differentiate between the two, because like I said, I didn't particularly like the comics, and I love the show. Yeah, I just felt like talking about that for a little bit. See.